Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 10th in the talks program, which takes us more or less not quite halfway through. There, in case you aren't aware, there are 25 talks in all. And we usually get, even to ones that are sold out, we usually get people in there because there are always no-shows. So don't hesitate if you see something, do come along. Let me start the introductions with our moderator, or immoderator, perhaps. We'll see. More interesting. John Michael O'Sullivan is a London-based writer and designer with a particular interest in mid-century fashion and photography. He's a regular contributor to Esquire and The Observer and edits the biannual magazine Article. For the past 4 years, he's been working with Barbara Mullen, one of the top models of the 1950s, writing a biography which explores fashion photography from the subject's point of view. Terry O'Neill has photographed the rapidly morphing front line of fame for over 6 decades. Terry began his career at the birth of the 1960s, while other photographers concentrated on earthquakes, wars, and politics. O'Neill recognized that youth culture was a breaking news story on a global scale, and he began chronicling the emerging faces of film, fashion, and music, people who had gone to define the swinging 60s. By 1965, he was being commissioned by the biggest magazines and newspapers of the world. No other living photographer has embraced the span of fame quite as he has. Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela, Frank Sinatra, Amy Winehouse, Audrey Hepburn, Bridget Bardot, Nicole Kidman, and every James Bond from Sean Connery to Daniel Craig. Terry photographed the Beatles and the Rolling Stones when they were still struggling young bands in 1963. He pioneered backstage reportage photography with David Bowie, Elton John, The Who, Eric Clapton, and Chuck Berry. And his images have adorned historic rock albums, movie posters, and international magazine covers. And if you think that the world of fame is fleeting, it's good to know that his images are embedded in major collections and galleries around the world. So they will live on when these individuals have long departed. Douglas Kirkland has been deeply involved in fashion, photojournalism, and portraiture. And like Terry, working for the world's most reputable and impressive magazines for more than 50 years. As a young photographer in 1961, he was assigned to shoot Marilyn Monroe. And during several hours in a closed studio one night, captured a stunning portfolio of alluring and intimate images that survive to this day as a testament to her beauty and her vulnerability. Douglas was born in Toronto, Canada. He joined Look magazine in his early 20s and later life. During the golden age of 60s, 70s photojournalism, his assignments ranged from the famed Trans-Siberian Railway to Japan, and from fashion to film. He has photographed the famed Coco Chanel at work and the stars of over 100 motion pictures. From The Sound of Music to the Titanic and The Great Gatsby, he's been exploring the ever-bending, shape-shifting universe of fame. His work is in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian, the National Portrait Gallery in London, the Houston Center for Photography, Annenberg Space for Photography in Los Angeles, etc. And he remains in demand today by international magazines such as Vanity Fair, and is a recipient of Lifetime Achievement Awards, including the Lucy Award for Outstanding Achievement. When not traveling the globe on assignment, he lives in the Hollywood Hills with his wife and business partner, Françoise, recharging his creative batteries, which we all need to do. Absolutely. And so I look forward to the discussion, and I'm sure our audience does too. Please welcome our distinguished guests.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, it probably goes without saying, but it's a huge privilege to be sharing a stage with these two gentlemen who are, in very different ways, legends in the world of photography, who've spent a lifetime photographing people that have become legends and obviously have become legends themselves. It must seem like a travesty in some ways to focus on one decade when both of your careers have encompassed so much more than that, but it's also quite exciting to talk about a decade that really shaped for you both the start of those careers. I think particularly here in London, where the 60s continues to reverberate through art, through fashion, through photography, it really is, I think, very appropriate to talk about that era. Having said that, I'm a great believer in taking a long run at these things. So I was going to start by moving further backwards and talking about, I suppose, where both of you started and how you got interested in photography. So Douglas, I was wondering if you'd be interested in telling us about, if I hopefully get my slide working, this fresh-faced young gentleman on the screen in Canada, which I believe is you. And if you could tell us a little bit.
Speed graphic, the hot camera of the day. It was a 4x5-inch film you would put in the holder and shoot one side, and then you'd put in a slide and flip it over and shoot a second picture if you got a chance to get a second picture. And that was what it was all about. And that was the excitement I found as a 14-year-old boy, which is when I got started in Canada. And that was a time when we did not have strobe lights. We used to put a flash bulb into the holder each time we took a picture if we needed flash. And that was the beginning of my career. And I esteem to be in areas like I'm sitting in now with all of you today. And it was very exciting. And I went on to Look magazine. I was there 12 years until they went out of business. And I was fortunately asked to come over to Life magazine. I was one of 3 people who were invited to go to Life magazine. And I worked there off and on for them for many years till they flickered out, more or less.
And just jumping back to, I suppose, that transition from obviously your childhood and that hobby of taking photography, how did you get started in the actual industry? Because you moved to New York, didn't you?
Step by step.
Yeah.
Frankly and truthfully, I had dreams. I mean, you may have dreams as well, and these were dreams that I fortunately was able to establish and work within and work with them. And I didn't expect to get into the movie business. That was Elizabeth Taylor who started me in that, and she said she wanted to work with me because she had been ill here in London, and they thought they weren't going to be able to do Cleopatra, and they were thinking of doing it in Los Angeles, and it did happen, and I was all part of that with Elizabeth Taylor to begin with.
And before Elizabeth, of course, there was Irving Penn, who gave you your real professional start. How did that come about?
Irving Penn was a brilliant fashion photographer, and I was living and working out of Richmond, Virginia, in south of D.C. in the States, and I was working in advertising, and one of my clients had shown me a story on Irving Penn, and frankly, that was an inspiration, and I wrote him 3 letters, and he finally replied to one, and he said, "I have no openings, but if you would like to come and see me at a time when I'm available, I will be happy to talk with you." And you know what happened? By the end of that meeting, I got a job. And that was part of my secret. And I learned a great deal from Penn, who was a great Vogue photographer, and he could do anything. He was the passion for me of a whole world that I hope to be part of. And that's, I don't want to speak anymore at this time.
No, we can keep on going. But Terry, from your point of view, we were just talking before the talk began, and you could have had a very different career.
What, being a priest?
Exactly.
Oh, God, actually, it's true. When I was 13, there were two of us picked out in a class to study for priesthood. And after 2 years, the man who was a convert who was conducting our education in it said I wouldn't make it because I had too many questions. And funnily enough, the other guy, who was my friend, went on to be Monsignor at Westminster. So but I mean, thank God I didn't. I wouldn't be here now.
There, but for the grace of God.
Yeah, it's true.
And so how did you then step from that into photography?
Oh, God, don't ask me. I was a jazz drummer and I wanted to go to America. So I went to, I read somewhere that British Airways were I was a really good drummer, by the way. I was playing in all the London jazz clubs from 14. And I read that British Airways were taking on stewards to fly to America, and you flew there, stayed there 3 days, and came back. And I saw this as the new life for an English jazz drummer. So I went to BOAC, and they said if I took a job there in the photographic unit, I could get in to be a steward quicker. So I did this. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I got sent down the airport to photograph pictures. I photographed a famous guy one day, Rab Butler, who was the English Foreign Secretary at the time, sitting around amongst African chieftains on a cheap little camera. This is. Reporter comes up and says, oh, I'd like to show that picture to my picture editor. So I sent up the film. Then suddenly I had a job photographing, you know, the guy loved the pictures on the roll. I don't know why. Because I never knew what I was doing. I mean, it was all fun to me. Yeah. I mean, every time I took a picture, it was something exciting, you know, it was incredible. Anyway, so I did that, and then I met a guy at the airport, and he was a really good-looking guy, and all the movie stars who flew into England wanted to, he asked them to come down and photograph them on the set. So he said, I need someone to cover for me. So I said, oh, I'll do it for you. So I then stayed at the airport. Then he died in a plane crash 3 months later, and I got offered his job. Now, this is all in a period of 6 months.
Yeah.
And I went up to this picture editor, and I said, are you sure you want me to do this? He said, listen, you're going to be the youngest photographer ever in Fleet Street by 11 years. And he said, why I've got you here is we think pop music is going to be big in the 60s. I said, oh, really? And so he said, you get on great with them. You're a jazz drummer, you'll be able to talk to them. And so
you're our way in.
Yeah. So I start on the job, and he said, now look, tomorrow I want you to go down to Abbey Road. There's a group there called the Beatles, and they're making a song called Please Please Me. Go and photograph them. And so I did. And the paper published the picture. And the paper sold out. Now, what you must remember, there'd never been a picture of any pop group in a newspaper ever. And the paper sold out, so they thought they're on a good thing here. Anyway, I'm sitting in the office and waiting for the next assignment. And the phone rings, and it's Andrew Oldham of the Stones saying, can I do for the Stones what I did for the Beatles? And those were my first two jobs. And all the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, if you look at the shot of the Beatles, have you got it?
We'll come on to it in a second, yeah.
Yeah, it's so innocent. I mean, nobody had ever photographed a group before. So, and I've got Ringo holding the cymbals. I mean, how I did it, I have no idea. Anyway, I did.
You got through. And this was all for the Daily Sketch.
Yeah.
Which at the time...
Which was a tabloid for young people.
But I mean, it had over 1 million circulation. It was massive.
What it led me to was to shoot all the other photographers were 30 odd, 40 and all that. They didn't want to do any of these young people. So I'm doing about 8 jobs a day, shooting Mary Quant, Vidal Sassoon, Gene Shrimpton. I mean, I was having the time of my life.
Don't forget Winston.
Huh?
Don't forget Winston.
Yeah, yeah, in
Mr.
Winston.
Churchill?
Yeah, every
Yeah.
type of job. And I was scooting it along
Yeah.
great.
And then, well, that was all happening in London. Obviously, you had, as you say, pictures like those with Jean,
Yeah.
with Honor Blackman as Pussy
Yeah.
Galore. Douglas, in New York, you were moving on then to Look magazine, which is really where you found your home and got your break. And just as the Daily Sketch was huge in the UK, Look really was a phenomenon in America. I mean, it had, I think, at its peak, almost 8 million readers, and it was the magazine that everyone read and everybody wanted to be in. How did you get your start there?
At Look magazine, I was freelancing in New York successfully, fortunately, and I'd done the most absurd thing. In June of that year, I'd gone to Life magazine and Look magazine, and I'd asked for a job, any job they would give me, and they showed me out the door. I didn't get anything. The funny thing is, 6 months later, I got a call from the director of photography at Look magazine, whose name was Arthur Rothstein, and he said, "We haven't hired a new photographer in the last 13 years, and we have to put some new life into the magazine." And we wondered, I've been asked to meet some people, and you were among them, and we're going to give you a couple of assignments, and you see how you can do with it, with them. And the first picture story I was sent on was at university, where I was to photograph fashion, men's fashion. And that's not very easy for a young boy from Fort Erie. 7,000 people. And, but I did it, and I did it successfully. And then they asked me to do some other work, and I was sent off on different assignments. And I was the guy who could do anything, because I wanted to do it. In my Canadian way, and you have to know what Canadians are like. Okay, they wanted to grab on, and here in the UK, you had great individuals like Terry here. But where I was, there was nothing like that. And I eventually was sent to California with the movie editor, whose name was Jack Hamilton. And he got a call from New York and the head office. And he was told to go to Las Vegas to visit Elizabeth Taylor, who'd not been photographed or done an interview since she had started to work on here in London.
Cleopatra.
On Cleopatra. And she had not, they thought she couldn't even do Cleopatra at that point. And so, frankly, they said, go with Jack and see if you can
Persuade her to.
propose photographing her. And so what I did is I sat in the back of the room as Jack Hamilton made his interview, and he knew Elizabeth quite well. And at the end, I walked over to her and I said, "Can I have your hand here?" I looked into her eyes and I said, "Elizabeth, I'm new with this magazine. Could you imagine what it would mean to me if you gave me an opportunity to photograph you?" You probably had similar stories.
I've got better stories.
Okay. We've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, She said, okay, come tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. And truthfully, that went around the world. As
That was this cover.
That was the cover of that, my first Look magazine.
Yeah.
And there she was. And the world wanted to know about Elizabeth. And I came here when she was with Richard, and a lot of life came into their life. And I was here in the thriving 60s.
Yeah. And obviously, the work with Liz then very naturally led on to pictures like those with Judy Garland and obviously with Marilyn Monroe. So you really became known for those very intimate, very kind of quite emotional portraits of these actresses who were at the absolute peak of their power and success, but really found a way to catch them in that very vulnerable, very intimate state.
That was what Douglas was built on, truthfully.
Yeah.
And my wife, Françoise, is here. Stand up, Françoise. And she has provided a great deal. We've been married 51 years now.
Wow.
And she has done a lot of the job for Douglas. Okay, I would like to applaud Françoise. She's very embarrassed and doesn't want me to say anymore. Okay. Anyway, Françoise has been a part of my world and remains that to this day. And we work together. We've been married 52 years, and it doesn't seem to stop. Thank God. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And so then with, as I say, those images you were creating at that time, I suppose the images are hugely famous and iconic now, but what's almost become as famous are the behind-the-scenes pictures where you see these pictures taking place. And again, that simplicity, it is just a young man with a camera and a woman. It's very direct, it's very... What was that experience like?
Well, with Marilyn Monroe, she had been ill, and the world wanted to see what she looked like. And she was up for a photo session, and it happened to be about 9 months before she died, unfortunately. And I was with Marilyn, and I was with her on 3 occasions, and she said we talked about what we would do on the first occasion, and she said at the end of the interview that first day, she said, "I know what we need. We need a white silk sheet, Dom Perignon champagne, and I won't have anything else on." Wow, for a young boy from Fort Erie, Ontario, that was vibrating. And she did, I did, and we did. And that was the story of Marilyn. And I had my House of Blad there running, and we got pictures that still remain to this day.
And I suppose it'll come up with you as well, Trey, but that thing where nowadays that kind of picture with that level of star would come with such a production. You would have an entourage on your side and hers. You wouldn't have that sort of intimate and direct relationship.
Actually, Marilyn had said at a certain point, she said, "I want to be alone with this boy. I find it works better that way." And that was...
I think it did.
That was on one of the last pictures taken of me shooting Marilyn, and then we were alone together. And that's when the whispers started. But nothing happened because I just kept grinding my Hasselblad, which was the camera of that day, and taking more and more pictures. And that was the excitement of Douglas's beginning.
And you moved on then to photograph a very different woman, which was Coco Chanel in Paris. And again, there's a fantastic picture of the two of you together. But that must have been an entirely different experience.
Yes, this was at a different time, and I knew very little about fashion. And the editor, the fashion editor of Look, said she wanted to go to Paris and do something on Mademoiselle, as they called her, Chanel. And she wanted to be called Mademoiselle, even though she was approaching 70 and this time. And you normally wouldn't call a lady of 70, you'd call her Madame. But Mademoiselle wanted to be dressed as Mademoiselle. And we got along very well.
And she was someone who'd been through quite a rough ride because she had, during the war, she'd sort of had to close her business. She'd obviously had quite a lot of political issues. Had staged a comeback in the late 50s. So really she was, I think, quite guarded about her public perception, but you managed to get behind that and really build quite a lovely relationship with her.
I formed as a young man. You can see me there on the, I look a little younger than I do today, and I was thin and tall, and she looked up to me, and she eventually said, I want you to come to Switzerland with me on my vacation. And I got a quick reply from my office in New York saying, come home, and Mish. And that was the editor's name.
But it was a remarkable, it was 3 weeks you spent with her?
3 weeks
Yeah.
in Paris. And I did not speak any French at that time. This lady helped me a little later. And I can cough up a few French words if that means anything to you. Anyway.
Yeah. And so then, while that was all happening, and I'm conscious I'm leapfrogging, but back in London, as Terry mentioned earlier, you were with the Beatles in someone's backyard with a band.
Yeah.
So at that point, was there any sense that they were going to be as big as they became?
Who was to know a year later they'd taken the world by storm? I mean, their success was incredible. And the whole life was music and rock and roll. It changed England forever. All the young people were given a chance. And we all made something of it. We all worked together. It was an incredible time. I mean, I wish it would happen again, but I don't think it ever will.
Different times.
Yeah.
And did they have a confidence about them? Did they think
they
were going places?
they just loved their music.
Yeah.
And the Stones were the same. The Stones, the Beatles were 4 different people, but they were more like one. They all spoke at the same time, you know.
Mr. Wilson.
Yeah. But the Stones were 5 individuals, and you treated them differently. I mean, they were a blues band, basically. Anyway, it was great times. Anyway, and the Animals were great. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, the amount of talent that came up every day. One day there's Gene Shrimpton, Mary Quant. I mean, they Twiggy. I mean, they just sprang up out of nowhere.
And did it feel like that? Because obviously it's easy to look back and go, yes, explosion. Did it feel like it was an explosion in terms of all that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I must tell you though, we all used to go out together at this club called the Ad-Lib Club, which was in the back of Leicester Square. And we used to sit in the club saying, what are we going to do when all this is over? You know, what job are we going to do? Because we all thought it was going to come to an end.
You had to go get a real job, the priesthood.
I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, I think Ringo's father, Ringo went to buy his wife a hairdresser chain.
Okay.
I mean, but they
Sensible.
all had, And we were convinced it was going to be over and we'd have to get a proper job.
Because there was no precedent, I guess, really.
No, nothing.
Yeah. It's quite
incredible.
Yeah. And again, as with Douglas's pictures, you really were able to get in behind the scenes and capture people in a very informal way. And I think historically, when you looked at magazines, people were presented as their publicists would have wanted them to be seen. So you saw stage studio portraits. Neither of you had studios. You very much went out on the road with these people.
Yeah, that was the way to shoot.
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of our success, really, Doug, wasn't it? I mean, we just got inside, got on really well with people. I mean, I remember Frank Sinatra. I mean, I became friendly with Ava. I mean, what happened was, after 4 years, I got fed up with newspapers because I found they sent you on a job And they never want to follow, you know, if somebody got evicted and something, and I always want to follow up the stories. And they said, no, that's yesterday's news. We want tomorrow's news. So one day, I won't tell you the story of what it was, but it was a giant funeral in Croydon.
Should narrow it down.
Yeah, you know, when that plane crashed in
okay,
Norway. Yeah. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I went back and I said to the picture editor, I said, Len, I can't do this anymore. And he said, well, you better walk in and tell the editor. So I walk into this editor's office and said, sir, I can't take this anymore. I'd like to leave. He said, the day you walk out of here, you're finished. He said, this paper made you, and without us, you'll be finished. And that put me in a blue funk, but I left and took off. And then I went to Hollywood. And of course, they loved me there because I photographed the Beatles, Stones, and all these
all the
people.
right credentials.
Yeah. And they loved me. And of course, they were used to people like George Horrell and that type, you know, all big cameras, working in studios. And I'm running around with a little 35 mil.
Yeah, much more unthreatening.
Yeah.
So you had, obviously, you were photographing people like Marianne, who was quite kind of, I guess, a girl next door at that point, and you really...
Yeah, well, the manager wanted to make her look sexy. I don't know whether that makes her look sexy, but that was what happened.
It does.
Yeah.
But of course, then people like David Bailey, and as you say, it was that birth of people really becoming aware of photographers, and the photographers starting to almost become...
Well, I figured he was part of the
famous,
60s, part of the story.
Yeah.
There were three of them. There was him, Bailey, Duffy, and Donovan, who I knew them all. And, you know, I used to look, I thought, blimey, they're proper photographers. I didn't think, I mean, I thought, oh, I'd love to do what they do. And they're all great. I mean, it's amazing, really. And it's all turned out different now. But
and you say that with David. Did you guys ever feel part of the story, or were you very much
No.
behind
Well,
the
I mean,
scenes?
I thought it was all going to be over, but it was just a way of life and things to do.
Yeah.
You know,
keep you out of trouble.
Yeah.
And of course, there's extraordinary pictures like Jean and
Yeah,
Terence.
that was to capture the two faces of the 60s there.
Which it
Stamp
really
and
is.
Shrimpton.
Yeah. And that's something that just has become such an iconic point in time. And Douglas, from your point of view, obviously you started to come to London more and more as well as the 60s progressed. So I'm just going to jump past this work. This actually wasn't in London. This was you, sorry, jump back one, with Vanessa Redgrave.
This is Vanessa Redgrave because you know what happened? The world was wanting to know what was going on in London, and they wanted to emulate it. Vanessa was working on a film in Los Angeles, and Françoise was with me, and I started painting these British flags, and I asked her to pop her head through the seamless paper, and that's where that picture came from. And I'd been raised with a British flag around me in Canada, for many years, and so that was this
How that
period.
came through. And so you photographed faces like Vanessa, who was very much part of the London scene. Penelope Tree, who's on the next image. But of course, over in London, then also people like Julie Christie, Peter O'Toole. Sorry, I'm jumping a little bit too fast.
This is
We can stick on
John
this one.
Lennon.
This was actually, I suppose this is where it transitions into you guys both working on film sets a lot.
This is the Beatles had just broken up, and John was making a movie in the south of Spain and also in Germany, and I went with an editor to the south of Spain and got to know and like him very much, because he was a wonderful man. He just, if he was in this room, you'd all feel his vibrations. And maybe you still do today if you ever knew him. And that was why I was so destroyed when I heard about his death in New York about 2 or 3 years later.
And this was a film he was working on, is that right? He was
what?
appearing in a film at that point. This picture was from a movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was part of a film called Francoise, do you remember the name of that film?
The John Lennon film in Spain.
How I Won the War, which was
Should have known
an joke about how an inept serviceman, private, had screwed up everything, but he maintained had won the war. And that was the story of that movie.
And we talked about this earlier in the week, but that process of working with stars on movie sets, how did you guys deal with that? Because they're obviously in character and filming. You're trying to catch them, sort of almost get a little bit closer, get underneath all of that performance.
Well, truthfully, in simple terms, this is 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Mr. Kubrick, another look photographer.
He had worked as a photographer at Look magazine.
Back in the 40s.
100 years before me. Stanley Kubrick. And he did an extraordinary film that was shot here in London. And the funny thing was, Stanley had invented all these different devices to get different images, and I was not allowed to divulge what technique he had used. And frankly, what I did is took a fisheye lens here and modified it, and that's how that image was
captured.
A very well-known one for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
And there were also, then you have Mr. Redford and Newman.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and it was a lot of fun working with them in the Western United States.
And then, sorry, very slow reactions.
Okay, this was.
It was his birthday yesterday.
Oh, was it? Okay.
In Berkeley, we saw this picture yesterday, and this was just, I did a series of pictures. There were portraits I was asked to make on Dennis Hopper, and frankly, in the back of his property, he had a road going 2 different directions, and that was what was happening in his life, because he wasn't sure what he should be doing, and that's what is in this picture.
And then, if I move on to Terry, you obviously were equally busy on the film sets. This is Modesty Blaise and Monica Vitti. How did you enjoy that world?
Oh, I loved it. It was fantastic. I mean, I loved working. I met everybody: Paul Newman, Robert Mitchum, the lot, Lee Marvin, of great people. And that was what really made my career in the end.
Moving from music into the movie
world.
world.
We used to get employed to work on movies, didn't we? We used to get paid a lot of money for a start, and we sold all the pictures, which was another good part.
Special photography.
Yeah, special photographers we were. There's a whole gang of us, Pierluigi, Hatami, I mean, all these foreign names. We all got, it was fantastic, wasn't it? Great time.
Money that we didn't expect.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
It was
Now,
a very hard
that was
time.
when I become friendly with Ava Gardner. And I said, I've got a chance. I've got an assignment from Life magazine, do Night and Day with Frank Sinatra. He's making this movie in Miami. And she said, oh, I'll write you a letter of introduction. I thought, well, that's really nice. So I write the letter. I take the letter. I'm standing on the set waiting for him to arrive. And that's him arriving on the set with all these bodyguards. Yeah, and I thought, my God, what have I let myself in for here? And, but he, you know, he was incredible. He was, when he was in the room, you knew it, you know, he was an incredible man, a great talent. There's nobody around like that anymore. I mean, they're so talented, and he let me in his life. He said, I walked up to him, I gave him the letter, he read the letter, and he said to these guys around, he said, right, he's with me. Then I was, and then I could go anywhere with him. For 3 weeks I was with him. And I could go anywhere with him. We barely talked, but I realized that was the first major lesson I learned in photography, that to be there but stay out of sight.
Okay.
I know, it was incredible.
Yeah. And just always be there
And
at the right
the
moment.
other great story, there was two great lessons I learned. Was years later, I was working for Life magazine again. They do the movie issue, you know, Life goes to the movies once a year. And I got put, I had this assignment to shoot, it was Paramount's 75th birthday.
Okay.
And I had to do all these stars outside their gate, right,
Oh, yeah.
which was a whole big thing. But I mean, there's everyone from Douglas Fairbanks to Robert De Niro, Tom Cruise, you name it. Every single top star was there. And one of them was Elizabeth Taylor. So we do all these pictures outside, then we go inside the studio, and I have to do different setups of, say, Bob Hope with all his leading ladies and all this type of stuff. Anyway, I'm looking for Elizabeth Taylor. So I said to the PR, "Where's Elizabeth?" He said, "She's outside." I said, "What's she doing out there?" He says, "I don't know." So I said, "All right, I'll go and find her." So I go out in the corridor, and she's standing in the corridor, cowering. And I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "All those stars." I said, and this is when she was at the height of her fame, the most famous movie star ever. And she said, "All those stars." And I thought, my God. She said, I said, "Well, I mean, you're the biggest star of them all." You know, I thought she was joking.
Yeah.
She said, "No, but I don't know anybody." She said, I said, "Well, who would you like to meet?" So she said, "Oh, I'd love to meet Robert De Niro, and I'd love to meet Harrison Ford." So I take her on my arm, walk back in the studio. I'm surrounded by movie stars, right?
Yeah.
And I go straight up to Bob De Niro, who's just started, by the way. I said, "Bob, this is Liz Taylor, and she'd like to do a picture with you." Well, it was like, they couldn't believe it. But that was the final lesson I learned, that even someone like her, at the height of her fame, was shy.
Yeah.
They couldn't, you know, she believed in movie stars.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, she's right. Of course, that time comes and they get older and all that. It's a weird old life, isn't it? Actually, it is.
It's
I mean, we're old as it is.
We're very old.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting. I found the same thing on
Yeah.
more than one occasion. And I can feel, it's funny, you take something to the stars and they're delighted to see other stars.
Yeah.
And
They feel at home then.
yeah, that's how we often did the job, getting work done.
I'm just looking through briefly, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, as I was doing this research, obviously I came to realize that both of you had photographed the same people quite a lot, and I think where you both first met was on the set of How to Steal $1 Million.
$1,000,000, yeah.
When you both
This
were
was
clearly...
my How to Steal $1 Million as well.
Yeah. So were you both aware of each other before you'd met? Had you...
Yeah, we knew each other. Of course, you know, as photographers, you like the ones
And
you don't.
you get along or you don't. And
Yeah.
most people, like the Stillman and myself, they got along and have done it for many years. And that's why we're sitting here with you this evening, this afternoon, I should say.
You know, we must say, by the way, that Audrey Hepburn was probably one of the greatest movie stars ever. She was the nicest woman.
Undeniably.
And she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Great to shoot, wasn't she?
And when you guys were in that kind of situation, was there a pressure to try and find out, you know, when you know there's multiple photographers taking the same picture, the same woman?
We all see things differently, you know. I mean, Doug's is lit with a strobe, and that's natural light. I mean,
it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And you can see that again and again, I think, just those different perspectives, what you're looking at.
This has run as a cover many times, that picture of mine.
So you
And
Mr.
Bridget
Caine?
Bardot, you went past Bridget Bardot.
Oh, yes, just on the next slide.
Okay. There's Brie, as we called her.
And this is quite interesting because it kind of tops and tails the 60s. So you have Ringo, obviously, by Terry, what looks
Number
like Downing
10.
Street.
Yeah, number 10. Pretended to be the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. I mean, the things we did. I mean, I used to photograph them all week. There were so many magazines out who wanted pictures of them that you could make a living out of it alone. But they were great, weren't they, the Beatles, I must say.
They undeniably were. And I did this with infrared color film, which was an unusual film that has not been made in many, many years. It saw infrared images. It made a different look. And that was our exploration and how we would surprise people with what we would come up with. You and me.
We've done it all.
Been there, done that.
And so I suppose while that kind of top and tails the decade, I thought it was kind of an interesting point to talk about. These are pictures you both took in the early 70s, but I was interested in that whole thing about the 60s and at what point people started to look back and start to ask you to see the 60s pictures again and to start to become interested, because now we're sort of surrounded by it, but was it always that way, or was there a period when people were less interested and were just moving forwards?
I mean, they're all interested in the 70s then.
Yeah.
Well, I was taught to always look for the new face.
Yeah.
And I remember, because I used to work in America a lot then, and I heard this song over there called Take Me to the Pilot. And it was a great singer called Elton John. So I come back to England and everyone's asking me who do I think is going to be the next one after the Beatles, Stones and all that. I said, well, I just heard this singer in America called Elton John. I think he's great. So I go and find him, and he's this kid called Reg Dwight, who lives in a little flat in Edgware Road. And I shot him, and nobody wanted the pictures. You know, he had glasses. He was, you know, nobody wanted them. But I stuck with it, and he became one of the biggest pop stars ever.
He's done okay, hasn't he?
Still going, yeah.
And Douglas, for you then, how did it transition? Because in the early 70s, Look closed, you moved over to Life magazine.
Yes, because Look folded.
Yeah.
It wasn't around anymore.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it?
I was one out of three there were 25 photographers at Look, and I was one of three who were asked to come to Life. And so I did a lot of movie work, and this was in Las Vegas, and this is Anne Margaret on her chopper bike, and she told me she had a chopper in Los Angeles that she got and bought, and I said, could you get it brought here to Las Vegas? And a day or two later, we went out in early morning before anybody was around, and got a stretch of highway. And Francois drove the convertible car with the top down. And we got up to about 60 miles an hour, and I wanted the sense of movement behind Anne Margaret, and that's the picture we got. Yeah. But then, you know what happened? I had everything. I had 1 or 2 frames left in my camera, and I said, "Oh, Anne Margaret," well, she always liked to have her 2 names. "Anne Margaret, we've got it." And then she threw her legs out and said, "Whee!" And there's the picture.
That's how you do it.
And it's quite a story,
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
And you have to be prepared for whatever curveball comes at you at any point. I think you would say that
Absolutely true.
We are friends for many years, this man and I. And we're approximately the same age. And I'm older, much older. You're the kid.
I'm the kid, yeah.
Okay.
And so, just in conclusion, I gave these 2 gentlemen a very difficult choice earlier this week and asked them to pick their favorite picture from the 1960s, which was, as you said, like picking one of your favorite child. And you both actually had 2, but I know, Douglas, for you, it was the Elizabeth Taylor shot. Because as you say, that really started
That was the
for you.
beginning of my career,
Yeah.
photographing around the movie world.
Yeah.
And so that was probably Marilyn Monroe and all the others, all the stars we've shown you today, I've shown you today, all came after Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor.
Really started.
Elizabeth especially.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, she said, okay, come tomorrow night, because I had nothing to offer. I was the kid from Fort Erie, and I was sitting there, and she had not been photographed for a year because she'd been ill, and that was
started
it.
everything.
That was my beginning.
Yeah.
And then Terry,
What
from your
was
point
your
of view, it
beginning?
was a very different one. So you went for Mr. Sinatra.
Yeah. That was an all-time shot. That's a great shot. I mean, I know I took it, but I was lucky enough to be there. I mean, it was just, I was standing in the right place at the right time.
Did you know when you pressed that you had it?
No,
Yeah.
I was thrilled to death when I found it on the contact sheet.
I love
tell
this
you.
image.
Yeah.
I have this image at home
Yeah,
myself.
yeah, I know, I've seen it.
Sponsored.
But
We're
Liz
colleagues,
Taylor, by the
and
way.
we are friends and colleagues for many years.
Yeah.
And you work in a different continent than I do,
But we,
but we always were
Find
friends.
yourselves
Yeah.
back in the same place.
That's the truth of the matter.
yeah.
So you were just saying about
No,
Liz?
Liz Taylor was 5'4", and she wasn't a stunning-looking woman, was she? I mean, she had one thing. She had incredible eyes, that colour, like mauve eyes almost. And when she stared at you, you really felt it.
The full
But
force.
otherwise, you know. But I never really understood why she became, you know. It's just all the publicity, I guess, and all the ways of the world. But Bridget Bardot, on the other hand, was a stunner. I mean, couldn't believe it when I met her. She was 5'9", great legs, the whole lot. And I could never talk to her because I didn't speak French, right? And she was always having these affairs with different actors. Every movie I went on, she was with a different actor. And I thought, didn't stand a
Could never
chance
catch her at a
there.
loose end.
No, but she was a stunner.
I worked on a film with her in Mexico called
Yeah.
Viva Maria, and it was Jean Moreau and her.
Yeah, yeah,
and
she's nice.
You know what? I was called into the office of the head of photography at UA, United Artists, and he said, we have a problem in Mexico with Bardot and Moreau. He said, there are so many photographers that Louis Mel cannot do any shooting because they are filling they're getting all the attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, so you know what I've decided to do? I'm closing the set to all those people, and I want you to go and decide between them. And that was Bardot and Moreau for me. And I was there for many weeks, and I came away a much more grown man than I went down there.
That's a whole other line of questions. Just before we ask for questions from the audience, just that point about Liz Taylor and Bardot, the question for me really is, who was your favourite face across, forget the 60s, but of all time? Of everyone you photographed.
Out of all the people I've ever met, the most beautiful girl is Christy Turlington, who's a model, who's still around
Yeah,
now.
very much so.
She's a stunning girl.
Yeah.
Absolute stunner. She'd have gone into movies. And if Bridget Bardot had learned to speak English, she'd be a new star. But she never did.
And how about you, Douglas? Who was your favourite face to photograph?
I photographed Bardot, and I had learned enough French to get by, but that lady, Françoise Kirkland, is my favorite.
Right.
And she is sitting on. She's embarrassed and humiliated, but
You're
anyway.
embarrassing her, don't you?
Well, so I think that's actually probably the perfect note to finish on, but if anyone has a question they'd like to ask, I'm more than happy to take that.
Who's got the first question?
There's not a question
There's
in
one.
this
Go on.
room.
I have a question for you, Terry, about when you shot photographs of Faye Dunaway at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Yeah.
Well, when did you know you had the perfect shot? Because I know there was a series of shots.
Well, I mean, sorry, no, so I've got.
Want to be helpful.
I was shooting it for People magazine, who figured that she was going to win the Oscar. So I said to her, if you win, I've got this idea for a picture, because I've been to many Oscar shows, right, and they're boring, right? You sit there for hours and there's that. And the only picture you ever see of them are the people when they win it, holding it up and all that. And I knew, because I saw a lot of them the next day, that they're stunned and in a daze of, you know, suddenly they're offered millions and millions of dollars and they get every top script and suddenly they're top of the world. And I wanted to capture this in a picture. And at the Beverly Hills, you can't take pictures by the pool or anything around the hotel. But I was friendly with a guy called Sven, who ran the pool. I said, listen, I'm going to bring her down here at 6:30 in the morning with her Oscar, and I want to do this picture with all the newspapers and all the stuff, and just leave it to me. So he got us in there. It was 6:30. Shot a couple of rolls of film, and that's turned out to be one of my best ever sellers and one of Hollywood's most famous pictures now.
One of my most favorite pictures
Oh.
as well. You did it, man. There's the guy.
Oh, God. Anyway, that's the story of that picture.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Move us one more over here.
Hi, Terry. I wanted to ask you about the Bardot with cigar and how that came about. It's my favourite image from your work.
Churchill?
Bardot.
With cigar.
Oh, right. That was, I was on a movie, I think it was Shallow, and I was set up to do a portrait. And that, that you see that image, you just think it's her, right, standing somewhere, which she was, but you're surrounded by about 60 or 70 people. And I had this image, and I've got a couple of frames left, right? So I'm waiting and waiting for them to start the take. And they say take and everything. And just as they said that, the wind blew and I pressed the shutter, and that was it. I couldn't wait to see that roll of film. I had to wait 3 weeks before I got home before I saw the roll of film. But that's turned out to be a bestseller as well.
How close to her were you when you took it?
On Bardot?
Yeah, about here. No, she wasn't. Who said she's on a horse?
He was there, he knows.
No, she was standing there. And now she signs it. So we've got somebody in the office who worked on it for ages. And now she signs the print, which is great. She's got a fantastic signature, by the way.
Which is always good.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, just here.
Both of you. Is there anybody you haven't shot that you wish you had?
Well, for me, I wish I'd photographed Marilyn Monroe. Which he's done. That's the only one I've missed.
And Douglas, for you, anyone you would have liked to have photographed and didn't?
Truthfully, it's whoever is the star in front of my lens. That's the
You're
person
pointing at me,
I
but
want. It could be. Anyway, I tend to fall in love with the person whom I'm working with, because I learn about them and I want to know about them, and my interest and my focus is on them, and I want to do anything I can to help make them feel secure and important.
fantastic.
Yeah, that's true. That's a big part of our work, is we care for the people. I could never photograph somebody I didn't like. I mean, I just couldn't.
I couldn't either.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it?
Okay, just a minute.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
We've got a mic coming towards you.
Terry, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Just do what I've just done. If I could. I mean, oh God, That's the only thing I can say. I mean, I've been so lucky and I've met so many fantastic people in my life that I just don't believe it sometimes. I sit there, all I do is watch television and read. and I sit there and I think, I know him and I know her and I know her. And I mean, I've just had a great life, that's all I can say. But there's no advice I can give. I mean, I don't know how, I don't think you can get to where I got today. The photography's changed and it's all different. You know, it's a lot of selfies and all this stuff, and it's changed, Doug, isn't it? It's awful. And it's all, sorry.
I was going to say, Douglas, so for you, what advice would you give to your younger self?
We keep busy.
Yeah.
We're continually, I do a wide variety of work. I shoot fashion, I shoot individual portraits, and it's a wide spread of what I do. And that's what keeps us, Francoise and I, busy.
Keeps you busy.
Very busy.
Okay.
And I'm happy to be with you. I'm sure Terry feels the same with you all today.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys are you're the subjects. You're our subjects.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the perfect note to finish on. Both Terry and Douglas are actually around this afternoon if anyone wants to have a chat to them. Douglas is going to be at the pavilion at stand G22 and Terry in Siemens Hall at F14. So if anyone wants to come and talk to them further, that's where they'll be signing their books. So it just remains for me to say, again, thank you to you both for taking the time. Really enjoyed it, and thanks to you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.